Zhao concurred with the scheme once the moment arrived. Following a half-minute, Fong commenced sprinting, urging Zhao to bolt quickly. While in motion, Zhao questioned if Fong believed they could outpace the Spectre, and if Fong had previously been a patient at the psychiatric facility. He even mused how Fong possessed such familiarity with everything. Fong offered no reply, but started pondering. Regarding his initial entry into Chongshan Mental Institution previously, he had noted the overall arrangement and some routes inside the structure. Now they could capitalize on the terrain's advantage to put some distance between them and the female physician. Suddenly, while Fong was dashing, a few strands of hair appeared before his face. Upon witnessing this, he grew anxious, realizing it was the hair of the ghostly female doctor pursuing them. At that instant, Fong questioned the plausibility. He then wondered if he had miscalculated the elimination method, as they should have had a minimum of 2 minutes to flee. So why did she close the gap so swiftly? Then, he recalled Wang's flesh volume. Abruptly, when he glanced back, he was startled to observe something. The issue was that Li Fei had employed silicone augmentations to simulate an expanding chest. Hence, they were artificial. The ghostly female doctor began encircling Fong gradually. At that moment, Fong deduced that there was no silicone in the initial postmortem. It was Fong's turn to be erased by the ghostly female doctor. Much to his astonishment, he discovered himself slowly drifting through peculiar surroundings. Eventually, he opened his eyes and was shocked to find he had been reset back to his 20th life iteration. But the twist was he didn't transition to his wife's scene this time. He was restarting from when he touched the ghost's thighs. He was also astonished at that point, while Xiao exclaimed that he felt frigid after touching her thighs. Fong then pondered if the demise rewind operated on an incident basis. Akin to a game, the opening level was near the residential area, and the subsequent level was the Qingshan psychiatric facility. Since they had already conquered the first stage, the secure point automatically advanced to the second phase. He glanced at his device, noting there was 1 minute remaining, signifying that 30 seconds were still in reserve. He remembered that previously he perished because of silicone, but pledged not to repeat the same error again. Fong rose and tugged at Zhao's hair. Urging him to release it, Xiao reacted oddly, asking why Fong was departing right after a touch, since it marked his first instance of feeling a thigh. Fong clarified that both before and after contact, Li Fei was fashioned from silicone, so the flesh quantity couldn't endure for an extended period. Upon hearing this, Xiao was shocked and realized why it felt so ample. Then they began running, and Fong instructed Xiao to descend. They noted that everyone else was also fleeing ahead of them. Fong wondered why they were still present, and even Wang Xiao seemed tense. At that moment, Wang Xiao was sprinting out of dread of the Spectre. Suddenly, to everyone's bewilderment, Fong leaped from the third-floor stairs to the second floor. This startled Dahai, who begged the Wraith to leave him alone. After spotting Fong, Dahai felt a tad relieved, but still yelled at him, expressing how terrified he was because he mistook them for ghouls. Meanwhile, seeing them nearby, Xiao also became bewildered, questioning why they were moving so slowly. In response, Wang Xiao furiously asked, slowly, and stated that they had already descended a minimum of 20 floors, expressing bafflement as to why the edifice seemed so lengthy. Lang then inquired of Xiao how he managed to sprint so rapidly. In reply, Xiao insisted that it couldn't be 20 floors, because he and Fong had only descended 3 floors. Before encountering them, upon hearing this, they were all jolted, and Lang cautioned Xiao not to speak nonsense at such a crucial juncture. He threatened that if Xiao blurted out anything absurd again, he would strike him with great force. To their surprise, Wang Xiao spoke up, explaining that the spirits were erecting barriers. He then placed his hands on Lang's shoulder and divulged that his cousin had informed him that the spirits' power could fabricate illusions, potentially prompting them to create partitions. He also mentioned that individuals who encountered specters making walls would continue to spin in place and would never manage to escape. This elucidated why Fong and the others caught up to them so quickly, as they had been rotating in place. Upon hearing this, everyone grew tense, while Fong pondered the implication of the ghosts' constructed walls. Observing their intense discussion and overthinking, Fong resolved to take action. He approached them and proposed that whoever had a spare item should toss it on the ground as a marker. Wang Xiao concurred, urging everyone to mark their positions quickly. After everyone discarded their odd objects on the ground, Fong instructed everyone to descend to investigate. They all slowly went down, and after descending 2 floors, Xiao abruptly asked Fong to halt. Fong asked Xiao what was amiss and why he was requesting a stop. Lang looked carefully and was astonished to see the identical items they had discarded as markers lying in front of them. They started yelling, realizing it was Fong's lighter and the girl's currency. Among the items, Lang exclaimed that he believed it was over, realizing they were truly confined within the ghost's illusory barriers. He asked what they should do about it, knowing that if the ghost caught them, they would be doomed within seconds. Fong retrieved one of the objects they had employed as a marker and began to contemplate. Meanwhile, Wang Xiao shouted at everyone, urging them to cease their arguing. As his cousin had stated, that ordinary individuals couldn't circumvent the ghost's illusory walls. To resolve the situation, they realized they had to rely on spirituality to penetrate the illusion. Wang Xiao then inquired if anyone had something spiritually enlightening. Everyone looked at Wang Xiao with a questioning expression on their faces. To everyone's surprise, Wang Xiao shook hands with himself and speculated aloud whether being chased by a ghost earlier counted as a life and death ordeal. He hoped he could quickly ignite his spiritual energy, and if he could become a spiritualist, he wouldn't be pressured by his cousin within the family. So everyone else began to wonder how they could assess their spirituality. Lang suggested they try it in the same manner Wang Xiao had. Following that, everyone began doing it like Wang Xiao. Seeing everyone follow Wang Xiao's lead, Fong grew frustrated, feeling like everyone had lost their focus. Recalling his previous exploration of the psychiatric hospital, he remembered that the exit of the stairwell was on the right. Although he couldn't ascertain which building they were in, he speculated that the layout should be analogous. Wang Xiao noticed Fong engaging in something else and questioned what he was up to again. Fong, getting set for the search, thought that rather than participating in aimless prayers, he ought to concentrate on searching for clues. Seeing Fong so composed again, Wang Xiao believed that Fong wasn't acting correctly, as he was far too calm in a situation like that. From the commencement to the conclusion, Fong didn't betray a hint of trepidation, even when confronted with the apparition. When the specter of a woman materialized, Fong, who was clearly at the forefront, didn't flee at the first chance. Instead, he pressed against the wall to avoid a clash. They all scurried into the stairwell, leaving just 3 individuals behind. And now Li Feifei was unaccounted for, implying she had certainly perished. But the 2 fellows and the female spirit lingered in the passage for a full minute. So Wang Xiao pondered their actions and why the phantom didn't inflict harm. Wang Xiao even briefly contemplated whether Fong and Xiao were exploiting the female specter. Then, dismissing his prior thoughts, he vocalized his opinions to everyone, declaring that it was improbable since, after all, she was a ghost. Hearing this, others were puzzled by Wang Xiao's behavior. Abruptly, Fong then placed his hand on the adjacent wall, causing Xiao to question his motive. Xiao even requested Fong to show him, implying he could also be of assistance. Leisurely, Fong commenced walking downward, touching the wall while counting to 15. He paused, surprised that he had actually located the portal. Xiao, noticing the metallic gate, was amazed by Fong and sang his praises. In the meantime, Wang Xiao was taken aback, seeing a portal in that locale, and astonishingly, he began repeating those phrases repeatedly. Observing this, Fong approached him and implored him to settle down, affirming to him that everyone could see it was a door. Anxiously, Wang Xiao inquired of Fong how they could access the portal. Since Fong was clueless about the answer, he chose to attempt unlocking the door, reasoning that it could guide them to their goal. He then announced to everyone that he hoped the doorway was unlatched, so he twisted the door's handle. And to their delight, it actually swung open. As they stepped into the chamber, they were met with an odd setting, with a variety of peculiar attributes. The instant Fong unlocked the door, everyone began rushing inside, chuckling with relief at their deliverance. But Fong recognized that it wasn't over, so he kept quiet despite his wariness. All those surrounding him were bolting into the room, shoving him aside. Only Zhao noticed that Fong remained still. So he inquisitively questioned why Fong wasn't sprinting, and why he seemed so composed while facing danger. Upon hearing this, Fong chuckled at the very idea of being in harm's way, as everyone else was focused on self-preservation. Interestingly, during their encounter with the female Dr. Ghost, there wasn't a pressing need to flee at top speed. Even though everyone else rushed past them, there remained one boy lagging behind. He came closer and frantically urged them to run or step aside, begging not to be used as a human shield if they were suicidal. Actually, Fong was staying put, because he wanted to avoid being the last one. That way, it would be easier for him to make contact with the female doctor's thigh and activate his spiritual power more quickly. He also mentioned that there had been instances of ghosts escaping from the psychiatric ward, and his previous lack of encounters was merely good fortune. So, it was quite something to run smack dab into one head-on the other side. Everyone was scrambling to get out of there. But suddenly, Wang Xiao yelled out, commanding everyone to stop in their tracks. He halted them because they faced a dilemma. Two paths lay ahead of them, and they were now undecided which direction to choose to continue. They all started to ponder the options. So, Lang asked his companion why they shouldn't consider going to the left. Upon hearing this, his buddy became incensed and retorted that he knew Lang was trying to utilize him as a test subject to scout the path, and so the boy told Lang to go himself, whichever direction he had in mind. While everyone was arguing and bickering amongst themselves about which door to take, Fong remained standing very quietly. So Wang Xiao questioned Fong which route they should take. Everyone else also agreed that, since Fong had discovered the doorway during the Ghost Wall episode, he must also know the way out of the present predicament. Seeing all that, Fong was annoyed and a little disheartened, wondering what had come over everyone. When it was time to flee, they were pushing him, but now that they were in a bind, everyone was turning to him for an answer. Fong then smirks a bit, which Lang then frantically asks what Fong was smiling at and why he wasn't speaking up sooner. Lang also mentions that the ghost was closing in, and Fong was still putting on a show. Despite this, Lang had faith in Fong because he could sense his presence. Hearing this, Fong became serious and realized that it didn't matter to him, because in his eyes, they were merely instruments at that moment. The lady doctor was unbeatable, so, if he wished to stall, he was compelled to forfeit lives. By surrendering, he meant that he would utilize them all as bait for the specter. Abruptly, they all detected the sound of the female ghost nearing. Thus, they all bolted in an attempt to protect themselves. Fong was elated as the female phantom was finally closing in. But it became apparent that Wu Dahai was at the back of the pack. Trying to evade, the specter went berserk trying to seize him. He was yelling for everyone to step aside and give him room. But witnessing the phantom so proximate made him even more frantic. He grew petrified and scurried even more rapidly, thinking that he couldn't perish so prematurely. Just ahead of him, a boy named Chung was dashing, and he puzzled over who told Chung to sprint faster than himself. At that juncture, Dahai acted impulsively. He grabbed Chung from behind and flung him toward the female Dr. Spectre, believing it was destiny and that he couldn't meet his end right then. Chung was bewildered after Dahai committed such an act against him. Before Chung could utter or do a thing, he was assaulted by the female Dr. Spectre. Dahai chuckled and reassured Chung, stating he'd burn incense for him on holidays. Fong observed everything attentively, and after Dahai's deeds, he reflected on the concept that someone who had lost their humanity wasn't vastly different from a phantom. He made a decision to strive even harder, hoping to awaken his spirituality swiftly in order to diminish casualties. So Fong went for touching the thighs again. Everyone else was sprinting to salvage themselves, but only Xiao noted that Fong wasn't among them. When he glanced back, he saw Fong once more caressing the legs of the specter. Xiao then approached them and mentioned to Fong that touching the ghost's thighs and not inviting him to a personal feast without sharing wasn't fair. Xiao then touched the legs of the female wraith and informed Fong that, if he ever had the chance to touch the thighs again, he should summon him too after feeling them. Xiao was completely experiencing the sensation and divulged that the skin was unbelievably smooth, resembling ice and jade. Xiao then inquired of Fong whether a living woman's thigh felt like that, and if Fong had ever caressed one in reality. Xiao was so delighted at that instant that he was blushing continuously, observing that Fong also grinned, impressed that even in such a circumstance, Xiao could effortlessly utter idioms. Fong also speculated if perhaps Xiao could ignite his spirituality as well. After that, they both resumed running to reunite with the others. While sprinting, Fong questioned Xiao if he wasn't fearful that the female ghost doctor would eliminate him, to which Xiao responded that awaiting death was far worse than being killed outright. Xiao also mentioned that he was a little comforted because Fong was there beside him. Hearing this, Fong was somewhat startled and didn't have a retort to that remark. Upon arriving at a place, Xiao asked Fong to wait and see if it was a hotel. When Fong noticed that it actually appeared to be a hotel, he began to feel famished. He revealed that he hadn't eaten dinner due to overtime, and all the running simply made him even hungrier. Despite being starved, he truly desired to consume some food. To their astonishment, Wang Xiao interrupted Fong and told everyone that eateries usually possessed rear exits. He requested that everyone else investigate. Wang Xiao also cautioned Xiao not to be in a rush to locate sustenance, as they should first discover the departure point. And once they were outside, Wang Xiao pledged to treat Xiao to a feast of land, sea, and air. He even volunteered to secure a few women for Xiao if he wished. Fong then glanced back at Dahai strangely and informed Wang Xiao that he was anxious. He wasn't fortunate enough to relish it. Abruptly, Dahai moved extremely close to Wang Xiao and commenced buttering him up. Wang Xiao asked Dahai not to mind Fong, as even if there was no opening, he'd dig one for him out of thin air. A girl exclaimed that she discovered the portal. Hearing this, Wang Xiao asked her not to move as he would open it himself. Smiling, Wang Xiao assured everyone that they were secure now. But to their shock, the instant Wang Xiao opened the door and they stepped inside, they were stunned by the vista before them, as there was only a corridor with one doorway, from which a radiance was emanating. Seeing this, Fong wondered if in an even dimmer setting, the progressively muted luminosity implied that they were advancing toward a more internal area of the phantoms, and it wasn't so much a passage to life. Wang Xiao proceeded to inspect the doorway and revealed to everyone that it was unlocked. Upon hearing this, Fong contemplated if they were more on a dead end. When they all passed through the entrance, they were astonished to witness a utility chamber beyond the door. Wang Xiao grasped the scenario and began making a fuss about it, realizing it was a dead end with no path out, and that they had fallen into the ghost snare. At that moment, Fong pondered if he had chosen the incorrect route, realizing he should have taken the left trail instead. However, it was too late for them to turn back now. Fong then thought that while it's feasible to offer one person to assist others escape, no one understands how far they must flee or how many lives will need to be relinquished. So he considered it might be wiser for him to discover the female ghost and get reborn. Somehow, Joe comprehended what Fong was contemplating and informed him that if he went back now, he would absolutely stumble upon that spectral woman. Notwithstanding this caution, Fong was still contemplating returning by unlocking the entryway. But abruptly, everyone commenced conversing about the predicament. Some whispers surfaced, questioning if they were trapped there, and a few even started indicting Fong for their circumstances. They asserted it was entirely Fong's doing, that if he hadn't selected the incorrect route and lacked direction, Fong ought to have consulted with them beforehand. Then they all pondered what course of action to pursue now. Hearing all those words and inquiries from others, Fong became intrigued and chuckled a wicked laugh. Despite doing everything, they were casting blame upon him, which indicated they were all very fascinating individuals. Fong uttered these remarks in a mocking manner. Unexpectedly, before Fong could give a retort, Xiao spoke up and yelled at them that Brother Fong hadn't compelled them, and that they were the ones who had desired to accompany Fong. Xiao also pointed out that it was they who had requested guidance in the first instance. So now, attributing the wrong selection to Brother Fong was also on them. He also questioned why, if they possessed the capacity, they hadn't chosen for themselves. Dahai strangely answered Xiao that they might not have had the prowess, but at least they wouldn't act carelessly like Fong did. He added that if Fong was unaware of the path, they could have had a discussion. Dahai also mentioned that they had confided in Fong and let him make the choice. But who could have predicted that Fong would choose without thinking? Xiao was still enraged at them for speaking ill of Fong. Dahai restated that he believed not only had Fong betrayed their confidence, but he had also guided them to a hopeless situation. While they were debating and quarreling over Fong, Wang Xiao cut them off and requested they cease fighting, as the most paramount matter for them at that moment was to determine how to survive. Wang Xiao then shared that, according to his scrutiny, the bazaar being only assaulted one person each occasion, and following this, there was a respite of 2 or 3 minutes. So the sole resolution now was to designate one person to distract the entity and fabricate an opening for everyone else to flee. Upon hearing this, Fong chuckled because he comprehended they were going to single him out, and as Fong had foreseen, Wang Xiao approached him and shoved him, claiming that if it weren't for him, they wouldn't find themselves in that dilemma. So it must be Fong who had to atone for his wrongdoings. Witnessing this, Xiao nervously inquired what Wang Xiao was doing and demanded that Wang Xiao leave Fong untouched. Xiao then rushed toward Wang Xiao to liberate Fong from his clutches. In response, Wang Xiao summoned everyone to come and assist him. Hearing this, Dai Hai and the others glanced at each other hesitantly. Xiao then seized Wang Xiao by the throat and kept him away from Fong. Startled by Xiao's maneuvers, Wang Xiao entreated him to release his hold, but Xiao wouldn't yield. So Wang Xiao questioned Dahai why he was just idling there, and why he wasn't lending a hand. Dahai then moved in and pulled Xiao away from Wang Xiao, even as Xiao yelled at him to release him. However, Xiao couldn't break free from Dahai's grasp. While they were struggling, all of a sudden, they detected the sound of a door shutting. It turned out that Fong had been left behind, and secured the door from his side. Yet everyone else believed the girl was responsible. So she began weeping, insisting it wasn't her doing, as she hadn't done anything at all. And furthermore, she couldn't perceive much in the darkness. Witnessing Fong willingly trapping himself behind the portal, knowing he'd be seized by the spectral female doctor, shocked Wang Xiao. Wang Xiao then, in bewilderment, asked Fong if he was a human or that peculiar being. Fong replied that he'd always figured he wouldn't have interest in folks anymore. But it turns out that people were much more fascinating than the strange creatures. Fong then chuckled and thanked them for adding some spice to the world for him. His final words were that next time, he'd be sure to repay them handsomely. After which, he was attacked by the female Dr. Spectre. Seeing this, they were all petrified. And even Xiao attempted to wrench the door open to rescue Fong. However, Wang Xiao and the rest stopped Xiao from doing so by keeping the door secured from their side. Once they were convinced that Fong had been assaulted, they fled, despite the others running away. Xiao continued to lament for Fong, insisting that he was going to come save him. In the meantime, as Wang Xiao scampered, he produced a wicked laugh. But when he glanced back, he was astonished to see that Fong was still smiling, even after being attacked by the spirit, and being on the threshold of death. Even while dying, Fong asked Wang Xiao to hold on for him. The scene then reverted to the instant when their thighs were touching. So the very same chain of events transpired again. Fong got up, and they both dashed towards the downstairs area near the others. However, this time Fong sported a bizarre, devilish smile on his face, while the others were descending the stairs. Abruptly, they detected the sound of someone approaching them from above. Seeing this, Wang Xiao took off running. But to his relief, Fong sprang in front of him. Fong didn't stop and continued dashing towards the entrance, while Xiao, again, questioned them why they were running so sluggishly. Gradually, all the conversations happened again. But this time, Fong was directly counting the steps to locate the exit, without getting entangled in the chat. The second Fong unlocked the door. Everyone questioned Wang Xiao why he had claimed they hit the wall. Wang Xiao was dumbfounded to witness that Fong had found the portal, and asked suspiciously how he had located the exit so swiftly. Xiao happily questioned Wang Xiao why he was standing there and waiting, urging him to just bolt, still perplexed. Wang Xiao ran inside after crossing the portal. Wang Xiao curiously inquired of Fong if he had been enlightened. However, Fong didn't reply. Upon reaching the fork in the path, Wang Xiao again remarked how Fong had instantly located the door, suggesting that Fong must know which path they had to pick. Wang Xiao then asked Fong to lead them to freedom, promising that everyone would surely compensate him whatever he wanted. Fong responded by declaring that there was 1 minute remaining, and after that minute, the specter would materialize. Upon hearing this, Wang Xiao became elated and remarked that, since Fong knew the exact timing of when the apparition would manifest, it seemed that Fong had truly become the spirit master. Wang Xiao then told Fong that, as long as Fong would lead him out of the ghost lair, he'd pay him $5 million. Abruptly, Fong glanced back at him oddly. Noticing Fong's expression, Wang Xiao got edgy. Fong then stated there was no need for haste, as before departing, he had one more act to carry out. Hearing this, Wang Xiao, perplexed, asked what Fong intended to do at such a moment. Suddenly, to everyone's shock, Fong struck Wang Xiao in his sensitive area, causing Wang Xiao to howl in agony and collapse to the ground. Wang Xiao was constantly wailing, because Fong had wrecked his private region. Fong then cheerfully responded to Wang Xiao to retrieve his 5 million, and with that, he should mend his eggs. The aftermath of Fong's deeds, and whether everyone would be able to confide in him again, is uncertain. Fong may or may not be able to justify his reasons for breaking Wang Shou's eggs, and whether he opts to assist the others or not depends on his amount of confidence in them. Zhao's compassion towards Feng may actually play a critical role in Feng's survival. But ultimately, the outcome is reliant upon the choices and interplay of all concerned. At the commencement of the narrative, the chamber of the lead character, Feng Shu was portrayed where he slumbered soundly. Abruptly, to his astonishment, a dulcet sound started to permeate his ears, prompting him to awaken feeling irritated by the intrusion. When Feng Shu stirred and peeled open his eyelids, he was stunned to witness something that made his eyes widen in fright. There, inscribed on the wall, were ancient symbols. At that instant, Feng questioned what was transpiring to him and who had etched those symbols on the wall. Out of nowhere, those inscriptions vanished, leaving Feng even more strained. He began rubbing his eyes, wondering whether he was still dozing, daydreaming, or imagining what he had just perceived. Again, he contemplated that the inscriptions he had just viewed were clearer and more authentic than he had initially assumed. Rapidly glancing around, he placed his foot on the ground and grasped that it wasn't his sleeping quarters. Astoundingly, Feng rose and pondered where he had ended up. Noticing the somber and unclean appearance of the room, he peered towards the table, anticipating to discover the instant noodles cup he had left there last evening. After eating together with the two tissues he used to wipe his hands, to his shock both were absent. Then fear consumed him. Feng positioned his hand over his head, attempting to comprehend what was unfolding. Suddenly, from nowhere, his mind absorbed some details. He had somehow entered the form of his counterpart. In a parallel reality, both Fangs were orphans, similar in age and look, but their journeys in life were completely distinct. The original Feng was fostered by benevolent individuals and was accepted into a prestigious college. However, in this alternate dimension, he had quit secondary school and began working as a realtor in property, living a more commonplace existence. Feng gazed at his hand, pondering whether it was plausible that he had crossed into another parallel realm occupying someone else's body. He contemplated accepting this actuality, but still couldn't comprehend the motive of the symbols inscribed on the wall. In the recollections of the original body possessor, there was no account of such an occurrence ever happening. While he was reflecting and deciphering the situation, suddenly he detected a young woman's voice calling him darling. He was taken aback as it was so sudden, and in his actual existence, he didn't have any girls in his residence. The girl then notified him that it was time for morning meal. Feng gradually looked towards her and observed that she was an exceptionally gorgeous girl. However, he still puzzled about the term honey, questioning whether he had gotten hitched early in his current existence. She reiterated that his morning meal was prepared, assuring Feng that he could consume it. At that instant, Feng felt a bit more cheerful, thinking that temporal displacement wasn't so bad after all. This notion was partially swayed by the allure of the girl before him. Feng even mused that he wouldn't have encountered such a beautiful and gracious partner in his entire prior existence. Feng remained hushed, lost in his contemplation, so she kept reminding him that morning meal was ready. Feng wasn't responding because he was perplexed about what to address her. He deliberated whether to call her wife, ma'am, or sweetheart, blushing at the thought. He considered calling her by a pet name like Sweetheart, feeling that it complimented her ideally. Eventually, he resolved to call her by her name for the first occasion. He also thought that the recollections of the original possessor should be available in his mind, so he attempted to retrieve them. However, after checking and attempting to recall specifics about his spouse, he was stunned by what he discovered. There were no recollections of his spouse. No favorite items choices, colors, or edibles. It was a complete void. When it pertained to the girl, Feng questioned who the girl supposedly his spouse truly was. He stared at her, but she continued to grin. Inquisitive, he inquired about her identity and her relation to him. Abruptly, the girl's face transformed into a spectral appearance, and she asked if he could perceive her. Frightened, Feng responded with a tremulous apology, expressing his bewilderment and promising to reevaluate the circumstance. To his even larger amazement, the girl morphed into a completely grotesque being, her mouth widening menacingly. As she demanded to know if he could perceive her, Feng, petrified, felt tears welling up in his eyes. Suddenly, in a split second, the creature propelled forward, biting off his head, blood gushing from his body due to the sudden action. He howled in anguish, wondering what was happening. However, he soon grasped that he was still alive. Confusion clouded his mind as he questioned whether he was dreaming. But as he retrieved his head, he observed symbols inscribed on the walls once more. Afterward, he inferred that it wasn't a dream and speculated whether the vanishing inscriptions were clues, perhaps instructing him to act clueless. However, he promptly dismissed that notion. The possessor of his new physique wasn't visually impaired at all, just a regular individual who didn't comprehend anything about his supposed spouse and had lived solo until now. The possessor also hadn't detected or witnessed any unusual activity, indicating that he had never seen his spouse in his memory. Fong grew tense as he realized the implication. He couldn't let the spouse comprehend that he could perceive her as being a wife. It was out of the question suddenly. The occurrence commenced to repeat itself as the girl entered the room and notified him that it was morning meal time, and his morning meal was ready. At that instant, Fong believed that his optimal chance of surviving and living a typical existence like the original body's possessor was to disregard the other individual. Therefore, he refrained from gazing at her and continued to overlook her presence. She sat down on the floor and looked towards him, asking if he was awake because his morning meal was prepared. Fong tried his utmost not to move or gaze at her, fearing that even the slightest motion would result in her immediately assaulting him. To Fong's astonishment, she twisted her face back like a specter, causing him to look at her with wide, expanded eyes. At that moment, Fong realized he had committed an error, and he questioned if the girl was playing by unconventional rules. The girl then extended her tongue, which seemed to be of a considerable length. She licked his cheek with her tongue and asked if he could perceive her. Without wasting a second, she once more propelled forward and bit off his head, causing blood to spray all over the floor. Again, to Fong's shock, when he cried out in pain and opened his eyes. After the incident, he discovered himself back in his room alive. This time he felt frustrated with the girl and himself shaking. He couldn't shake off the bewilderment of what was befalling him, and why he questioned if it was a demise reset or a ceaseless loop, contemplating whether he'd revert to the initial location, following each demise analogous to a checkpoint in a game. Subsequently, Fong commenced interpreting the scenario. He discerned that just a moment ago, when he dropped his gaze and averted looking at her, she approached of her own volition. This suggested she needed to ascertain if he was able to perceive her before acting. While Fong was absorbed in his gadget, the lass once more entered the room, notifying him that it was time for the morning meal, and his food was prepared despite her efforts. Fong remained entirely fixated on disregarding her. Unfazed, she tried to gain his awareness by addressing him as sweetheart. Fong speculated that she wouldn't fancy him. Yet the instant he entertained that notion, she retorted by stating that she did like him, and recalled he was short-sighted. She even inquired if her assessment was correct, and questioned the reason for having his gadget so close, further inquiring if he was able to make her out. Fong at that juncture considered whether it was unfeasible to execute irregular actions. Attempting to compose himself, he perceived that she exhibited no response, which left him feeling eased and joyous. Abruptly, from nowhere, Fong was dumbfounded as the lass was now within his gadget, asking him if she appeared attractive. This time he couldn't restrain himself and jolted back in dread. He observed that the lass had vanished from the gadget, but soon he detected a sound from behind him, affirming that she was cognizant of his vision. She metamorphosed back to her grotesque form, ready to sever his cranium once again. This instance, he yelled furiously with an affirmation as he conceded that he could perceive her. He attempted to strike her back, but the lass evaded his blow and bit off his hand instead. Fong wailed in anguish as she licked his hand. Notwithstanding his shock, Fong sensed a fusion of joy and relief. Realizing that this time he wasn't consumed by her, he grinned slightly but tensely pondered what would ensue. Repeatedly, he recognized he was consistently outsmarted by her, irrespective of his words or actions. Fong then disclosed that even in the sixth rebirth, he'd still been startled by his wife unexpectedly nearing him. He had even succumbed to his own performance abilities, culminating in his passing. The next time, she squeezed his face amidst the window grills. In the eighth attempt, he desired to flee, but couldn't, since he lacked the means to break free. He attempted praising her and being amiable. Now he opted to embrace the circumstance, rather than succumbing to strain and lamenting. At one juncture, he reacted with a resigned affirmation as she could perceive him, permitting her to erase him again. After perishing for the 13th successive time, he desperately yearned for demise. He then commented that some individuals were living, yet already departed, while others were unhinged, yet remarkably clear-headed. Thus, his passing persisted for the 14th time, and gradually, the count continued to escalate. Fong shared that with every demise, he obtained recollections of the initial form, and cultivated a profound comprehension of the realm he was in. Within this realm, there were noticeably an excessively abundant number of peculiar and odd tales. Ultimately, on the 18th occasion, while slumbering, he contemplated why he was able to keep expiring and resetting, and who inscribed those crimson streaks on the ceiling, and the reason for their disappearance after he viewed them. As his gadget chimed, he pondered about those inscriptions, and if all those civic legends were triggered by them. Then, he speculated that his wife might be one of them. A trickster, Fong then turned irate, shouting in his mind, "Die! Die!" As long as he was breathing, he pledged to ensure his wife's annihilation. Abruptly, the lass manifested again, informing him that it was time for the morning meal, and his breakfast was all set. Fong, now fully cognizant of the circumstances, chortled, realizing that she always intended to rouse him, but never made direct physical contact. He rose and advanced toward her, prompting her to inquire if he desired to consume her before breakfast. To her astonishment, he disregarded her and continued forward. It became evident in the narrative that Fong traversed through her form, as though she was a wraith when he passed out. She didn't act, verifying Fong's hunch that she could solely function when she was certain he could make her out. With a forlorn and frustrated countenance, she questioned Fong if he wasn't going to eat the breakfast she had already fashioned for him. Hearing this, Fong grinned and mused that the more attractive the dame, the better she could beguile an individual. She had summoned him for breakfast, but in actuality, she hadn't even fabricated anything for him. Fong then consumed a sandwich, contemplating the necessity to go outdoors. He discerned that without venturing out, he wouldn't be capable of amassing information about his wife or scrutinizing the anomalies of the present realm. This time, the lass's face surfaced on the floor, inquiring of Fong why he wasn't consuming the breakfast she had prepared, and if he was repulsed by her culinary skills. Disregarding her, he headed for the door to venture outside, but she materialized again, this time within the handle, questioning why he was venturing outside. Instead of remaining in the abode to keep her company, Fong remained resolute this time, cognizant that he had to venture outside, to accumulate the knowledge requisite to seek vengeance against her somehow. Infuriated at her, Fong was determined that no one could get away. After erasing him for the 18th time, no one he desired reprisal against. Deliberately, he walked towards the entrance of the abode, resolute to step outside and explore the realm beyond. He contemplated discovering a means to eradicate the strangeness, before returning to finally eradicate her. However, the instant he opened the door to step outdoors, he was shocked to view the somber realm beyond, with a scarlet sky looming overhead. Fong was astounded and speculated if it was hell, or something equally dreadful. There were a multitude of strange creatures milling about, engrossed in their respective activities. Suddenly, Fong commenced laughing with an eerie intonation, remarking how fascinating he discovered the present realm to be. However, as soon as he articulated that, he became ill and vomited. While he was ejecting, a young lady approached and inquired as to what was amiss. Shocked to observe her, Fong hesitated momentarily. The young lady asked once more if he was okay. Fong felt a sense of alleviation. Recognizing she was an authentic individual, he commenced patting her head, requesting she address him as brother. Fong at that juncture marveled at how endearing the young lady was, thinking it would be pleasant to possess a daughter such as her. Abruptly, much to his surprise, the young lady's face morphed into a monstrous visage once more, and she questioned Fong if he was able to perceive her. Observing this, Fong became tense, and suddenly, the vicinity transformed into a more hellish and gory scenery. As he peered up, the young lass mutated into a larger, more menacing monster wielding a weapon. The monster lunged at Fong, inquiring if he could perceive her. But this time, Fong felt no dread whatsoever. Instead of becoming strained, he erupted into hearty laughter, finding the circumstances genuinely captivating. In comparison to his former self, he realized he favored his current persona more, due to the fact he would not bear any future encumbrances. When he ultimately eliminated her, he gestured towards her, proclaiming that with so many spectral beings like her around, there was no need to fret about discovering an occasion to terminate. They all must perish. Fong felt a surge of exhilaration at the possibility. However, following his declaration, the girl erased him again without uttering a sound. Once more, Fong experienced a reset for the 20th iteration. Sleeping peacefully within his chambers, the girl entered without stirring him, informing him that it was time to dine and he ought to arise. Feeling strained, Fong questioned whether consuming breakfast 20 times per day could truly satiate them. The scene then transitioned to some point later, where the young girl drew near to him, with tears cascading down her visage, and implored if he could escort her home because she couldn't locate her mom. Disregarding her, Fong proceeded to survey his environment, observing that after watching for half a day, the world appeared teeming with all manners of oddities. One kind of being possessed a curious guise, lacking reason yet displaying aggression. They seemed to exist as mere air, incapable of affecting the surrounding elements. The other type bore an identical appearance to humans, blending in as close companions and relatives, engaging in discourse with their chosen victims. Upon receiving a response, they initiated their actions, much like his beloved spouse. Even though typical individuals didn't perceive their existence at all, they continued to partake in role play with someone. Fong pondered what the motivation behind it was. Abruptly, he comprehended that perhaps the spectral entities were attempting to integrate into human society. Following that, Fong started methodically to explore the world segment by segment. He even procured consumables and attended to all his routine obligations. While engaged in a purchase, he mused that with his meager 3-digit family wealth, it seemed he'd need to find a way to accumulate some capital if he desired to explore the genuine nature of the universe. Unexpectedly, Fong received a message from his store supervisor, Wu Dahai, where the supervisor was berating him that it was already midday, and he had not yet arrived at the work premises. And he mentioned how frequently Fong had been tardy that month. Dahai also inquired regarding the volume of clients procured by the enterprise. Thus far that month, his manager elaborated on, as he was unwilling to grant Fong the bonus and commission, subtly hinting how could Fong request it if he hadn't accomplished anything. Fong then recollected the payment from half a year prior, when the initial occupants sold a mansion, but the payment remained unreceived. Therefore, he felt somewhat delighted, contemplating that if he obtained the compensation, it would aid in his survival in this strange new reality. Fong communicated to his supervisor via message, declaring that he had relinquished his position and would return at a later juncture to settle the commission payout for the White Willow Academy. Following that, he pedaled onward on his bicycle and surprisingly materialized at the White Villa, where the surroundings were less than pleasing. It appeared like a horrific place. So Fong speculated where he had suddenly wound up, whether it was the sales office or not. Then he proceeded to venture inside. However, he received a call, and upon answer, someone was vociferously addressing him, inquiring why he delayed so long in picking up the device, and if something untoward had befallen him. It turned out to be his pal. So, Fong replied that he was fine and asked if they were at the office, to which his companion responded in the affirmative, mentioning that their superior, Wu Dai, had contacted Fong multiple times. Since Fong didn't respond, Dai became exceedingly annoyed with him, and as a result, Fong's friend had to do extra hours to cover for Fong's duties. Fong answered that he would arrive soon and they could speak later. After that, Fong pondered about the locality, as the entirety of the White Willow Academy had unequivocally transformed into a psychiatric facility, but it appeared that his colleagues were under its spell. He also wondered if this hospital would once again become eerie, which piqued his interest while his thoughts wandered. He abruptly collided with something. Fong was hurt by the force, yet he could discern it was soft. Intrigued, he extended a hand to feel it, wondering if it was conceivable. He had stumbled across the entrance to the hospital. As he placed his hand upon it, he realized it was in fact a girl's chest. Appalled by the unexpected contact, Fong drew back, but before he could react, he received a fierce, stinging smack from the girl. At that instant, his surroundings returned to their typical state, and he beheld the girl whose chest he had mistakenly pressed. The girl was yelling at him, calling him a scoundrel, and threatening to report him. A security guard, hearing the girl shout, came closer, inquiring what had transpired with her, and if the boy was Xiao Feng. Questioning what he had done, Noticing them, Fong was slightly startled. When he looked upwards to verify the location, he saw the sign of the White Willow Academy. He was in disbelief, so he closed his eyes and massaged them, attempting to comprehend what he was observing. To his astonishment, when he reopened his eyes, the scene had gone back to normal, and the entire White Willow Academy had vanished. Perplexed, he pondered what was occurring. Anxiously, Fong cautiously reached out to touch the area where the academy had stood, contemplating if it was plausible that he could perceive the mental asylum, but couldn't feel its solid form. He paused for a moment, hesitant that it seemed akin to those spectral entities that could only take action when they received a response. Only when specific parameters were fulfilled could they be engaged with. The instant he touched the wall, his hand went straight through it. Unable to manage his body's equilibrium, he discovered himself passing entirely through the wall and into the structure within. He was astounded by the sight before him. He was indeed taken aback as the entire space, including the main entrance, the dining hall, and the common area, was completely devoid of individuals. However, within the patient quarters, there was a potent odor of blood, augmenting his disquiet as he entered the ward zone. He observed a girl reclining on the bed. She started to laugh, addressing him as elder sibling, but her features appeared entirely unfamiliar. To her amazement, Fong traversed through the wall, without even acknowledging her presence or responding to her mirth. As he moved deeper, Fong encountered a beast with 4 eyes, yet he remained unflustered, continuing to travel fearlessly. Seeing Fong's indifference, the 4-eyed creature became bewildered. Gradually, he discovered an abundance of varied ghostly beings, with bizarre creatures all around, yet he remained unreactive to their actions. At that instant, a slight sense of relief washed over him, acknowledging that at the very least, there were numerous peculiar beings confined within the psychiatric facility, and the room entrances stood agape. However, there also existed the potential for the oddest entities to break free. Thus, he needed to maintain his composure amidst those repulsive specters. He offered a smile in that uncanny setting, ascribing his ability to stay tranquil, even in such circumstances, to his spouse. He gave her credit for the 18th time she had wiped him down, for having instilled that serenity within him. Subsequently, he understood that through some case analyses and figures, he could procure valuable information. Surprisingly, he came across a document holding details regarding an investigation in which someone had morphed into a peculiar being. Upon viewing the document, he pondered if it was conceivable that all the phantoms were once human beings, and all those wraiths in the rooms had been living souls. As he attempted to gain access to the report, he realized he was unable to, which led him to understand that the apparitions were an illusion, since he couldn't even obtain the report. Abruptly, he felt fibers brushing against his face. He tried to shift, but then checked himself, realizing that there was someone present. So in actual fact, a phantom was dangling from the ceiling and floated toward him. She inquired if he had arrived, and if Fong wished to delve into the puzzles of life with her. At that moment, Fong surmised that as there were hints in the office, there must be more in other areas, and all the responses to the inquiries must be at the heart of the psychiatric institution, essentially the chief's office. Therefore, he chose to advance directly to the origin. The ghost, suspended from the roof, was taken aback that he wasn't acknowledging her, so she ceased her actions afterward. Moving ahead, he noticed the administrative sector of the mental facility just occurred to align with the sales building. He additionally observed that there was no head's office on the ground level. Hence, he decided to ascend. As he proceeded toward the stairway, he caught sight of his colleague Xiao Hao and his supervisor. Wu Dahai was standing there. Dahai asked Fong angrily, how dared he appear at work after he had previously terminated his employment, questioning if Fong was aware of this. However, Fong disregarded Dahai's words. He progressed, pushing Xiao to the side, and pondered if there was nothing on the second floor. Seeing Fong act in this manner, Zhao was taken aback and perplexed by Fong's actions. Meanwhile, Dahai commenced yelling at Fong, inquiring how he dared to shove him and whether Fong had become disoriented. However, Fong paid no attention to Dahai and carried on directly toward the subsequent level. Ascending the steps, upon seeing this, Dahai asked Fong what he was doing and who permitted him to go to the 3rd level. Dahai even attempted to impede Fong, reminding him that his employment had already been terminated, and consequently, he could not proceed to the 3rd floor. As Fong didn't stop, Dahai instructed Xiao to come along with him and obstruct Fang's progress. Upon hearing this, Xiao was initially puzzled, wondering about the situation, but promptly responded with an okay. Meanwhile, Fang discovered the chief's office on the 3rd floor. When Fang tried to unlock the door to the head's room, Zhao and Hai cried out, telling him to cease. Yet he didn't glance at them and persisted in trying to open the door. Observing this, Dahai began to panic, crying out that they were all doomed. But the instant Fang swung open the door, he was astonished by what was inside the chief's room. A young man named Wang Xiao was engaging in intimacy with a charming and lovely young lady named Li Feifei. Upon seeing Fang and the others, they became embarrassed and started to clothe themselves. Wang Xiao yelled fiercely at Fang, demanding to know his identity and why he had invaded the space, and who allowed him to enter. But to everyone's amazement, Fang paid them no mind and walked directly to Li Feifei and grasped her hand. Thereafter, Li Feifei asked Fang intensely what he was doing and why he was seizing her hand. Noticing her uneasiness, Fang reluctantly released her as he was hurting her. Wang Xiao also angrily told Fang that it was something he should not do. Wang Xiao then summoned Hai to come and cut off Fang's grasp, but due to the peculiarity of the circumstance, Fang abruptly shuba Li Feifei yasida, exclaiming that she was being too loud for him. Li Feifei questioned how Fang dared to push her, but surprisingly, Fang wasn't even looking at her. He was intrigued by the note resting on the table. After glimpsing the note, he smirked oddly with a tense expression, as it dawned on him that there was indeed a huge secret concealed within the mental institution. So the letter described the very queries Fang had harbored up until now, and that the author was already aware. He was there seeking clarification for his questions. The letter exposed that everything he needed to understand was situated at the Green Mountain Mental Hospital. See building room number 520. It instructed Fang to uncover the reality there, as it was also where he would receive the choice. It was for Fang to embrace and appreciate Destiny's offering. Upon finishing the letter, Fang contemplated. Based on his intel, Zhou Qinfeng was likely the director of the Green Mountain Mental Hospital, so who was the intended recipient of the letter. Fang then pondered if Zhou already knew he was on his way. He chose to head to the given location in the letter, but unexpectedly, as if on command, the lights of the area went dark after the power was disconnected. Xiao got anxious, and Li Feifei even cried out in fear. But Fang wasn't particularly bothered about the lights. Li Feifei confessed to Wang Xiao that she was frightened. So Wang Xiao requested Dahai to contact and discover why the circuit breaker had tripped. Dahai, apprehensive of Wang Zhao's reaction, promptly agreed to call immediately and inquire about the lights. Conversely, Fang was contemplating that at such a moment and within that place, it was not just a simple power failure. So he firmly stated to everyone, no, that's not it. Upon hearing this, Xiao anxiously asked what was happening and told Fang that he was behaving unusually. When Fang activated his flashlight, he was astonished and confused as to what was transpiring. He was shocked because the Green City Mental Hospital was gone, or had vanished. Li Feifei then inquired of Wang Xiao where he was, because she couldn't perceive anything in the darkness and was afraid. So Wang Xiao requested Dahai to hand over his cell phone, to which Dahai replied that there was no service, so they couldn't utilize it. Wang Xiao then informed Fang that with his position and influence, he could access more hidden realities of the world than Fang could ever envision. Wang Xiao then analyzed the circumstances. No phone signal, suppressed light. If his assessment was correct, it all pointed to one conclusion they may well have stepped into. Before Wang Xiao could speak or explain any further, Fang, with a sinister grin, declared it to be the realm of the uncanny. In the ensuing scene, it reveals that the other employees of White Willow Academy were now uneasy, especially one of them, named Ratcha, who was feeling immense pressure because he had just completed filling out the report, but didn't have a chance to save it. Raka also wondered why it had to befall him precisely now, and it appeared he always encountered overwork somehow, and this time he would be required to redo it. Dai also arrived there and commanded them to cease their grumbling. He instructed them to go and check whether there was a circuit breaker problem. So Raka ran towards the entrance to inquire with the guard. When he reached the entrance, the guard questioned whether the building's power had suddenly gone out and whether everyone was safe or not. Raka answered in the affirmative, saying everyone was all right. but they were displeased by the prospect of working overtime later. The guard then indicated that he was going to investigate any circuit breaker issues, but for some reason Rocket informed the guard that it was Zhao's issue. The scene shifts back to the academy's interior, where the other staff members were also quite anxious. There, a girl named Jelly was waving her hand over her mobile, trying to ascertain something. She asked everyone perplexedly what was transpiring and why the flashlight on her mobile was so faint. So Fong inquired whether there was any dust on her device, suggesting she wipe it clean. Jolly responded that she had already cleaned her device, but it was still not functioning properly. Fong then observed that his phone's flashlight was also dim, so he questioned Wang Xiao about the cause of it. Raka also tensely mentioned that his mobile's light was faint too. Jolly then asked Raka what he had been saying about the realm of the bazaar. Hearing this, Raka shockingly inquired whether they were talking about phantoms. Jolly, upon hearing this, nervously asked how there could truly be apparitions in the world, and stated that it was just trickery, nothing beyond some natural events. Another girl got alarmed and wondered if she was going to meet her end. Hearing all the commotion, Wang Xiao grew exasperated and furiously ordered them to halt their nonsense and be silent. He then shouted and asked everyone to compose themselves, emphasizing that what he was about to disclose was of utmost importance, and it was about whether they could make it through this or not. Hearing this, everyone became stunned and looked at Wang Xiao with questioning faces. Wang Xiao then began revealing that there were ghosts in their existing world, and the so-called realm of the uncanny was the territory of spirits. They could conceive of it as an alternate reality, the realm of ghosts, the ghost domain. Everyone was now in utter shock to hear what Wang Xiao divulged. Raka then questioned the whereabouts of the security guard, Lao, as he had gone to check the circuit breaker and hadn't returned yet, and it had already been 3 minutes. To which Wang Xiao tensely replied that within the domain of the bazaar, ordinary individuals must be extremely vigilant and steer clear of infringing upon the ghost's death rule, or else there would be no disparity between that and pursuing demise. Dahai was trembling upon taking it all in, so he inquired of Wang Xiao about the immediate plan of action. Wang Xiao responded that they needed to act fast and discover a route to evacuate the realm of the uncanny, or else everyone would be obliterated by the apparitions. Suddenly, the surroundings for everyone changed, and observing this, they were startled, wondering what had suddenly transpired to their surroundings. Even Fong didn't express it, but he was extremely on edge because he recognized the settings. It was a familiar sensation for him, and he was certain he couldn't be wrong. It was the presence of a specter. Fong then announced to everyone that an apparition had returned. Upon hearing this, they began getting frightened and questioned Fong what he had been referring to. At a time like this, as there was no indication of a specter at all, but they were all oblivious to their surroundings, and without them realizing it, Xiao Li was ambushed by the specter. She couldn't even yell, because her mouth was being covered with branches from the ghost's hands. The whole incident was noticed by Fong. A girl once again asked him where the specter was, as it seemed Fong was just trying to frighten them. Without responding, Fong simply said that Xiao Li was no more. Hearing this, the girl standing near her was completely astonished and said that he was spouting nonsense, as Xiao Li was standing beside her. But the moment she looked to her side, she found nobody seeing this. She was terrified and started seeking Xiao Li everywhere. Shouting her name, the boys there were in shock, as they wondered whether the specter had truly surfaced there. Wang Xiao then inquired of Fong whether he witnessed the specter and what the specter looked like. Fong responded that his sight was obstructed, and he was merely able to see that Jolie had disappeared. But perceiving Fong's calmness, everyone was confused, and one man even asked how Fong could remain so composed when his co-workers were seized by the specter. So Raka asked if Fong wasn't acting normal, suggesting that Fong might have been possessed by the specter. Wang Xiao also tensely questioned Fong that he didn't appear at all afraid of the ghost. Wondering if he was a spirit medium, Fong confusedly asked what a spirit master even was. Hearing this, Wang Xiao pondered how Fong could maintain his composure in the presence of an apparition, contemplating what Fong's real identity could be. However, the core idea was that Fong was unfamiliar with the concept of a spirit master. Wang Xiao then offered a response to Fong that a spirit master was an individual capable of directing their spiritual essence, adding that his relative was indeed a spirit master. He also remarked that at this moment, The optimal strategy to resolve the predicament was for someone to evolve into a spirit master, a person who could wield psychic powers. Upon hearing this, Feng's face broadened into a wide grin, and he questioned Wang Xiao whether the spirit master gained their abilities within the uncanny realm, and how one would achieve that. Observing this, Wang Xiao was taken aback, realizing that even amidst such a situation, Feng could still make such astute evaluations. Perhaps Feng might just be the key to their liberation from the eerie realm. Therefore, Wang Xiao disclosed to Feng what his cousin had confided, that to become a spirit master, one had to control the spectral force, and it necessitated fulfilling two conditions simultaneously. One stipulation was enduring a baptism of immense fright between existence and non-existence, which incites emotional upheaval. And the second was making direct contact with the specter, to allow their energies to penetrate his soul. Suddenly, the very second Feng considered transforming into a spirit master, some dark rays approached his form, and his heart rate accelerated considerably. A luminous sphere manifested in front of him, and gradually it began shifting to a crimson color. So Wang Xiao went on sharing and cautioned Feng to be wary, elaborating that the ghost's energy is akin to a blood-soaked material. While it polishes the grime from the night pearl, it invariably defiles the core and snuffs out the essence. As Wang Xiao stated this, things occurred just as the luminous orb turned entirely crimson, and the instant Feng established visual contact with the sphere, his physique also turned scarlet and somewhat somber. Despite the alterations to his physical state, he was still attempting to piece together everything, to comprehend correctly what had befallen him. Following the process, he experienced an overwhelming surge of might within himself there. He pondered if, owing to the repeated deaths he'd gone through, he had never truly interacted with the specters before, and espoused the figures he saw littered across the streets, and the spirits within the psychiatric ward. As long as he didn't acknowledge them, they were merely projections from a different dimension, and that didn't constitute actual contact. But now the ghosts concealed within the shadows had breached into actuality, and they could inflict harm even without being visually detected. Thus he contemplated if, having further interactions with these specters, he would gain the ability to vanquish them. Therefore he concluded that he desired to become a spirit master. Abruptly, he perceived his wife in his field of vision. So he was a bit startled, but his concentration soon shifted, because an individual within the room bellowed out loudly. When Feng directed his gaze towards the origin of the sound, he discovered that a young woman was lamenting that another colleague was gone. Taken aback, Feng inquired who was missing now. The girl revealed that Jia Liang had vanished. He had been just standing next to her, but currently he was not anywhere in sight. Upon hearing that, Wang Xiao angrily shouted at her to stop talking, inquiring if she wanted to draw the ghost towards them. Li Feifei then approached Wang Xiao weeping and asked what course of action she should take, as she did not desire to perish or disappear. Wang Xiao retorted with fury, asking why on earth she was addressing him. Suddenly Feng interjected, noting that it's only 2 or 3 minutes. Hearing this, everyone grew apprehensive and looked towards Feng in bewilderment. Feng then explained that the time frame between individuals vanishing is 2 to 3 minutes. More precisely, it's 2 minutes for women and 3 minutes for men. He even detailed the justifications for his deduction. Firstly, security personnel Lao vanished 3 minutes prior, and subsequently Xiao Li disappeared 2 minutes after Jelly was gone. Zhiliang vanished. Feng further explained that if they infer from, then within 3 minutes, someone else will be vanishing following Jiliang. Hearing this, they all became frightened and gazed intently towards Feng. Suddenly, Feng began proceeding towards the exit. Upon witnessing this, a boy named Xiao questioned Feng what he was doing, if he was trying to get himself erased by ghosts. Feng responded with an affirmative, clarifying that he was seeking a path out. Feng also posed a question to the boy, if he anticipated them to remain stationary in the room and await their end. Following the response, Feng advanced further, but to his astonishment, Wang Xiao furiously called out at him to cease wherever he was positioned. Wang Xiao then questioned if Feng had already heard him tell everyone that no one was to move of their own accord, wondering if Feng was hard of hearing. Feng then pointed out that there were merely 8 of them left in the area, and following the pattern of one person disappearing after every 2 to 3 minutes, they would all be eradicated in approximately 20 minutes. So he might as well take a gamble Wang Xiao angrily and intensely shouted at Fong, stating that he was a regular individual. So what could Fong possibly know about it? Suddenly, his facial expressions contorted as he became scared by something. Actually, it was Fong who was staring back at him with a piercing gaze and instructed him to remain silent, warning that if Wang Xiao uttered another syllable, he would be erased before the ghost even acted. In the following scene, it was shown that Xiao had accompanied Fong for his exploration. As they journeyed further, they arrived at a location separate from the staircase, where the ambience felt unsettling. Xiao grew apprehensive upon observing this, and asked Fong why he had a premonition about the situation, and why they still hadn't discovered the staircase. Fong brought a finger to his lips and motioned for Zhao to be quiet, advising him not to create excessive noise. He analyzed the setting, noting an eerie illumination ahead. As they drew nearer, Fong's memory stirred, remembering that the glow bore a striking resemblance to the Qingshan Mental Hospital. Questioning whether it could possibly be the Qingshan Mental Hospital, Fong was caught off guard suddenly. Xiao approached shaking, embracing Fong and inquiring whether he was experiencing hallucinations. He asked where they were and why they weren't at the firm, as they were intended to be. Xiao also asked why the site had a feel of a medical center, from a frightening flick to him. In astonishment, Fong asked if Xiao could also perceive the hospital. Xiao confirmed with an affirmation, noting that he could also see the protracted corridor of the medical center. Upon hearing this, Fong grew slightly tense. He advanced towards the wall where traces of blood were observable. Carefully examining them, Fong determined that it seemed the existing psychiatric facility had spatially merged with the real world, akin to those peculiar animate beings they'd previously come across. It was no wonder they couldn't perceive the mental institution in the sales division before. It appeared that the psychiatric hospital had engulfed the sales section, and they were already within its confines. Fong pondered whether this was what was called a spectral realm. Abruptly, they spotted numerous bloodstains scattered across the floor and some ripped garments, which startled them. Fong pointed out that these were security outfits and women's professional attire, associated with Uncle Zhang and Shaoli. Fane proceeded, observing that the female co-workers at the sales outlet had well-defined facial features and svelte physiques, and less mass compared to their male counterparts. So it took roughly 3 minutes for them to consume a man, while devouring a woman only needed 2 minutes, which clarified the temporal disparity in their disappearances. Upon hearing this, Xiao grew frightened and anxiously asked if Fong was being honest, if they'd all been devoured by the bizarre beings. Fong replied that Jia Yang had just been abducted, thus they were secure for a brief period. Startled, Xiao inquired if that meant the strange creatures were feeding on Jia Yang. Nearby somewhere, Fong sat on the ground contemplating the scenario. Most of the specters were confined to the patient chambers. However, certain portals were ajar, allowing the spirits to escape. He hadn't encountered them in the imagined mental ward before, which left him perplexed. Fong observed the lacerations on the clothing and deduced that the edges of the fabric cuts were exceptionally clean, suggesting they were clearly made by a sharp-edged instrument. He then recollected someone and presumed that it could only be the individual he'd previously encountered. Given their role as a physician, they weren't restricted to a patient's quarters and could roam freely, similar to the female physician apparition. As Fong reflected on her, the female physician ghost descended from the ceiling and loomed beside him. Fong could sense her proximity, and suddenly his pupils began to glow crimson. Suddenly, when Fong looked back, there was no one there. However, the atmosphere became increasingly bleak and terrifying. Little by little, they began to hear unsettling noises. Xiao was now completely petrified and even in a state of shock. But Feng was still puzzled about the whereabouts of the phantom that had snuck up behind him. Had gone, while both were still attempting to make sense of the circumstances. The other fellows also materialized, inching towards them. They were all taken aback by their surroundings. Lang, one of the guys, asked where they were, as they were meant to be at the sales office, but it appeared to be a hospital. Seeing them all, Feng and Xiao were a bit stunned by the unfolding situation. Dai then asked Feng if they had observed anything when they first arrived, and if they'd seen Guang Lao and Shaoli. Abruptly, Li Feifei started behaving strangely, highlighting the abundance of blood on the ground. Wang Xiao also noticed the attire, recognizing them as belonging to guard Lao and Jiaoli, and in shock, asked if they had both been devoured. Wang, in dread, grasped Wang Zhao's hand and implored him to return home swiftly. Not wanting to vanish, she began to weep, and Wang Xiao concurred with her, urging her to release him without delay. Then Wang Xiao requested Fong to lead the route, but Fong didn't respond and remained silently fixed in place. Examining his phone, puzzled, Wang Xiao asked Fong if he could hear him. Wondering why Fong wasn't replying while he was speaking to him, Wang Xiao shouted Fong's name again, suddenly seemingly out of the blue. Fong looked up with a bizarre, aghast facial expression and stated to everyone that the hour had arrived. Upon hearing this, Li Feifei questioned Fong perplexedly what he meant by the hour had come. At that juncture, both Wang Xiao and Li Feifei sensed something behind them and began quivering in terror. Gradually turning around, they were horrified to see a female specter crawling on the ceiling, inching towards them in a startling way. The specter assaulted them, and everyone in fear took off running. Wang Xiao also commenced running, but in shock he felt someone grasping his leg, which terrified him further. When he looked back, he saw Li Fei lying on the ground, pleading for him to rescue her. Wang Xiao then glanced towards the ghost and observed that she was approaching swiftly. So he became anxious. He slapped at Wang's hand to break free from her grasp, and then promptly reached Fong and Xiao. Fong surveyed the scene, deciphering both the previous and the ongoing circumstances. As the female physician ghost neared Wang, she continued wailing in fear, begging Wang Xiao to save her and not to abandon her. Li Feifei looked towards everyone, her eyes beseeching for aid. But the specter grabbed her hair and held a sharp blade in her other hand, prepared to slice through it even in such an extreme moment. Li Feifei continued to call out for assistance from everyone around her. The knife was pressed against her neck as she cried out for assistance, but no one dared to step in. In the interim, the female physician ghost wasted no time and quickly slit her throat, causing blood to splatter all over the corridor. Witnessing the real-time death happening before their eyes, Xiao was aghast and announced to everyone that Li Feifei had perished. The female physician ghost then began to use her blade with precision, slicing through the attire and Wang. Seeing this, Fong was also dumbfounded as the female physician specter wielded a surgical blade, dismembering with exact and proficient techniques. It was evident that the female apparition doctor must have performed numerous surgeries at the psychiatric hospital while she was alive. Fong also wondered how he and Xiao were right there, in front of the female physician ghost, yet she wasn't paying heed to them. Instead, she handled Wang's body with serious responsibility and focus. Typically, surgeons operate on one patient at a time, making it virtually impossible to perform surgeries on two patients simultaneously after cutting precisely. To Fong's astonishment, the female physician ghost tucked her blade back into her tongue. Then she took Wang's head and placed it directly into her mouth. At that juncture, witnessing everything unfold, Fong shared with Xiao that the drive to ingest humans was likely a consequence of transforming into a specter, speculating about her slaughtering routine. Upon hearing this, Xiao was taken aback and looked towards Fong with bewilderment. Suddenly, Xiao noticed Fong advancing toward the female physician specter. Xiao, in a state of tension, inquired what Fong was up to. Fong then positioned himself near the female doctor ghost as she dined undisturbed. Unexpectedly, Fong delivered a punch to her face. He was taken aback to discover her body was as unyielding as steel. His hand bled after making contact. He then reflected that all the phantoms they'd faced thus far had abilities that completely overpowered humans, making people look like minuscule ants in their vicinity. He mused, perhaps only by becoming spirit mediums could they alter their circumstances. Agitated, Xiao urged Fong to flee the area. However, Fong countered that the female doctor ghost's pattern of assault involved targeting one individual at a time. She would dismember with a scalpel and then ingest them. In other words, during her meal, it was the safest period. Xiao noted that the female doctor ghost was nearly done consuming. Fong requested that Xiao remain composed, observing that while Li Feifei might appear delicate, there was abundant flesh where it counted. Her flesh would provide at least 3 minutes or even more, so there was no need for them to be hasty. Hearing this, Jiao felt queasy and vomited. Fong then recounted that Wang Xiao had mentioned that becoming a spiritualist necessitated permitting the power of ghosts to permeate one's soul. Throughout the spectral realm, the most concentrated, ghostly energy was inherently around the phantoms themselves. Furthermore, physical interaction would certainly expedite the process of infection. Suddenly, an odd sound resonated from the ghost in Wang's body. Upon hearing this, Fong ceased speaking and brought his hand closer to his ear to distinctly perceive the sound originating from them. Then, Fong sat down and extended his hand to touch the female doctor. Ghost thigh in actuality. Fong's interest wasn't the sound. His goal was to extract information from her. Hesitantly, he gently touched her thigh. Witnessing this, Xiao became bewildered and petrified. He conceded that he had always thought himself daring, watching mature films and such. However, he never imagined that Fong, with those bold eyebrows and large eyes, would dare to take liberties with a phantom. Fong replied to Xiao that he intended to linger a bit, and if Xiao was frightened and wished to leave first, he could. After contemplating for a moment, Xiao exclaimed that he would also do what Fong was doing, since he wanted to fully commit as well. Xiao then fervently approached the specter and fixed his gaze on her thighs. Slowly and hesitantly, Xiao touched her thigh. The moment he did, he felt an incredibly chilling sensation. He told Fong that it was frostier than he had anticipated. After a few moments, Xiao informed Fong that he hadn't observed any reaction or shift in his body. He asked Fong if he had undergone any modifications within his own body. Fong replied in the negative. Xiao was feeling bashful while touching her thigh, but he didn't want to withdraw his hand. So, he told Fong that he would persevere. Xiao then mentioned that he had never conceived that the first instance he touched a woman's thigh in his entire life would turn out to be a phantom. He also commented that those lengthy legs seemed longer than his whole existence. Hearing this, Fong deduced that Xiao possessed some considerable adaptability. Despite being initially frightened, Xiao was now making light of the situation, suggesting that he might hold some kind of promise. Fong then glanced at his mobile and informed Xiao that it had been a minute since they began fondling her thighs. He proposed that after another 30 seconds of contact, they would flee immediately, allowing ample time to escape.